First of all, I would like to thank the people that set up this gathering, John Lanchowski, of course, Jim, Michelle, Mario, who did so much work to get this group together. The whole idea of the book was to give the next generation the information that we now have about how the Soviet Union operated its intelligence service against us when we were ostensibly allies during World War II. And it was an incredible thing. The Soviets had something that no other government at any time in history ever had, and that is a cadre of people in the other country who were loyal to the Soviet Union, and because they were loyal, they were prepared to spy against their own country. That's an amazing concept. Usually, you can get a spy here or you get a spy there. Sometimes you get a spy for ideology, sometimes you get them for money. But the Soviets got a large number of people on the basis of ideology. Some of these people paid dues to the Communist Party for the privilege of being spies for the Soviet Union. And they were in the most incredible places. I mean, we all know the names of Alger Hiss in the State Department or Harry Dexter White in the Treasury Department. But there were many more. There was Lachlan Curry in the White House, and amazingly, President Roosevelt's closest friend and associate, Harry Hopkins, in the White House. A man who knew everything about everything in the United States government, anything he wanted to know. And his control officer, and we talk about him in the book and the control officer as well, Isaac Akhmerov, who was one of the most amazing men in the history of Soviet intelligence. He was here as an illegal. To the Americans, the American government, he was just a man with an accent who happened to be a businessman in New York and in Baltimore with an American wife. Very nice gentleman. Everybody liked him. He was the illegal directorate for the Soviet intelligence service, at that time called NKVD. We later knew it as KGB. He was the illegal director in the United States. And he handled Harry Hopkins. He met with Alger Hiss. He met with a number of other of the key spies. And we knew about him. We only knew a name. We only knew him as Bill. When Elizabeth Bentley in 1945 told the FBI about her role in Soviet spying, and she said, my contact was a Russian who I only know as Bill. It took years for the FBI to identify that Bill as Isaac Akhmerov. And in the 1970s, Akhmerov, teaching at the KGB school in Moscow, boasted to his class that he ran Harry Hopkins, the most important American agent that the Soviet Union had. And sitting in that class was Oleg Gordievsky, who defected to the British and spent 10 years in KGB on behalf of the British intelligence service, reporting what the KGB was into. And Gordievsky is an incredibly courageous man who was able to report to the West about what was happening. But the interesting thing in this context is he heard Akhmerov talk about Akhmerov's agent, Harry Hopkins. You look at the role of some of these people in very high positions. Why did they spy? They spied because their loyalty was to the Soviet Union. In regard to Alger Hiss, who Novatsky defended for so many years, the document is quite clear. Akhmerov meets with Hiss, who was not an agent of the NKVD. He was an agent of the GRU, the Soviet Military Intelligence Service. And he contacted Akhmerov to say that his handlers, his military handlers, were not treating his information with the respect he expected, and they were paying no attention to important material he had, and could the NKVD take over the transmission of some of this material back to Moscow. And he boasts to Akhmerov that when he was in Moscow after the Yalta conference, he was in the American delegation at Yalta and an advisor to President Roosevelt. He then flew with the Secretary of State to Moscow, and obviously not in the presence of any other American, the Soviet government gave him a medal for his work against the United States. And so Nowatzki would like to defend these people still, but it's embarrassing to him that there are people going into the archives and looking at the materials and actually understanding what these materials mean. Thank you. The other aspect that I think we should discuss a little bit tonight is the fact that for a long time, Americans were taught that the Soviet Union was our ally in World War II, and if we had differences later, we should never forget that they were our ally. What the Venona documents teach us is that we were co-belligerents, but we were not allies. They were spying in the United States not only against our government, but against ordinary Americans who were doing things that the Soviets were concerned about. And let me talk about one aspect of that. The Soviet intelligence service sent their agents into Jewish organizations because those groups were trying to help the Jews in the Nazi-occupied areas of Europe, were trying to get opportunities to smuggle them out. We all know about Wallenberg, who used money that was sent by the War Refugee Board to pay off Nazi officials so that he could smuggle Jews out of their grasp. That's what the Russians wanted to know about. They wanted to know who was helping the United States and who was helping American Jewish organizations provide support for the people who were the victims of Nazism. Why did they care about this? Because the Soviet Union intended to and succeeded in taking control of Central and Eastern Europe. And those people, those who were saved, were people who would be supporters of democracy. And that was their enemy for the future. And so the Soviet intelligence network needed to know who those people are in Eastern Europe who are helping to smuggle out Jews. Who are those people in Eastern Europe who are connected with the Americans so that they can be persecuted after the war? This is an incredible thing. And we see it now in part from the Venona materials because it identifies the people who went in to spy to help the Soviet Union, not to help the United States. And the more we see of this material, and I hope we're going to be seeing a lot more of it in the future, it teaches us that we have to be alert to the fact that a totalitarian regime, whether it's Nazi or communist, can never really be our allies. They are always our enemies because we believe in freedom and they don't.
Senator, you mentioned the problem of the New York Times. We went through this 30-some years ago before the founding of accuracy in media, going after the Washington Post and New York Times for inaccuracy and distortion and outright lies. I've seen some of the same radicals now teaching in college who were out there 30 years ago in the streets. Why are we facing the same problem at this point in time?
We're facing the same problem because of what you just outlined. That people who grew up in the radical movement, grew up in an anti-American movement, are now in a position to teach others and to spread the lies and disinformation that they learned themselves in the past. That's why it's so important that we have the documentation and we present it in whatever form we can so that people do know the difference between the truth and falsities, and why Victor Nowatzki doesn't like the idea of our going into the archives and finding such material. Because, you know, the concept of knowing the truth will make you free, it is the only thing that will make you free, and we need to know the truth and we need to counter their stories.